study looking at Elijah and Elisha. And the title of the lesson is Elijah and Naboth's Vineyard. And I guess if you think about Bible stories, I guess that's one that they stick in your mind, don't they? And you may not remember the details, but when I hear that name, Naboth's Vineyard, I remember that was a very sad story, in its outcome for Naboth. But it was a point that a lot of things changed. God made some changes at that point that had been building up. So we go back a little bit and look at our last lesson, what we had learned. I think something we'd already knew was that King Ahab was more wicked than all of Israel's kings before him. Was one thing that's been stated about Ahab. I had a list, and I wish I could have found it, but looking at all the kings of Israel, Brother Pete, you may know this number, but I don't. But it seemed like there were more on the not so good side as kings than there were on the good side. They had more bad kings than they had good. Does that ring true with you, brother? I hate to put you on the spot, but I don't know the list. But
No good king.
Well, okay, that's true. They all had their problems, didn't they? They did. So maybe we should say just some were worse than others, because that's a good point. He said no good kings. Well, that is true. There's none good. But I'd say Ahab on a list, he would have ranked right up there, wouldn't he? Just his intents. But you find out in this here chapter here, you find out really a lot about his character, what he was deep down, and I think maybe even who was kind of running the show behind the scenes. I don't know that it was him. But we did learn that he was a very bad king. He and his wife Jezebel, they had led Israel into worshiping the idol Baal. We learned that Elijah had prayed for God to withhold the rain, and God did. He answered that prayer 3.5 years. I can't imagine that. There's places on this earth that the amount of rainfall they get is just nothing. But a lot of it's uninhabited, or they've acclimated to it over the years, how to deal with it. But these people had not. And at Mount Carmel, we saw the end result of the idolatry. We saw how Baal's prophets, they prayed and did this and cut themselves, and they got no response from Baal. But then Elijah prayed, and we know what happened. We know that God sent fire down from heaven. He consumed the sacrifice. He consumed all the water that had been brought up and poured into over the sacrifice. Then we saw, there towards the last part of that lesson, how Jezebel had threatened to kill Elijah, and she had caught Elijah in a very weakened condition. Sometimes people don't show their weakness, do they? They put on a very strong front. I bet we've all come across people like that, haven't we? On the hour, they're very tough and they're carrying on, but there comes a point sometimes when it's just their breaking point. And I think that's what we saw with Elijah. He came to his breaking point. And God was very compassionate, very gentle towards him, how he treated him, how he sent the angel, gave him just exactly what he needed. He needed food and rest. We're pretty basic, aren't we? Well, I can say us guys are. We're pretty basic, You give us food and let us take a nap, we're pretty good shape, right? I was well known for that when we'd have Sunday dinner at my mother-in-law's years ago. We'd go eat lunch, and I'd find myself a spot on the couch and, do that fake, I've got my eyes open, but I don't. But so pretty simple, but that's what Elijah needed. He needed that rest, that recovery. So then God, he gets Elijah through that. He moves him forward. He tells him to go and to anoint a new king over Syria and Israel. And he tells him also to anoint his successor, who is going to be not Elijah, but Elisha. So he's going to be the one to anoint him, but he's also going to have a big part in getting him off to the right start. This would be his successor. God also told, I think, Elijah some good news, that there were 7,000 in Israel that had not bowed the knee to Baal. So again, I think he kind of got him over something that we can get in our heads sometimes I'm the only one. I'm the only one that's whatever it is. I'm the only one. And Elijah, he had to know that he was not the only one. So then this meant Elijah's mission at Mount Carmel was successful. Then he has to go back to work. His Monday came, I guess we could say. So we'll start this morning in 1 Kings chapter 19, in verse 19. And we'll read down through here. And we may or may not, we get into chapter 20. I don't know, I thought I was reading through that. We may go in there and just read some of that portion of Scripture. Because our lesson doesn't pick all of it up, but it picks a good portion of it up. But 1 Kings 19, verse 19, speaking of Elijah, it says, So he departed thence and found Elisha, the son of Shaphat, who was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen before him, and he with the 12th, and Elijah passed by him and cast his mantle upon him. I guess, I don't know, when I read that verse, I thought, wow, 12 yoke of oxen. That's a lot of oxen. If you ever saw anybody use an animal to plow, we did as kids going up through North Carolina, where we're going to Biltmore. This is when I guess you took the old turning route up through the mountains, and there was a guy, he had a team of mules, and he was plowing there on a hillside, and but he only had 2. But can you imagine having a set of 12 oxens plowing, using that? And the question was that, our lesson asked, well, why so many? Well, what had they just came out of? They come out of a 3.5-year drought, right? And they got some rain, but we've had dry spells around here. Does it take more than one good rain to kind of get everything back? It takes some time, doesn't it? So there were still a lot of the effects of the drought that they were dealing with, and this was one of them probably. I don't know that this writer, I don't think they were there, but this is what they think. One thing he was using so many oxen was because the ground was very hard. Another reason could have been that the oxen, just using a few or 2, they would have been too weak because they hadn't been being fed properly. And then this many just were needed to pull at this time to break up the very hard ground. So our first verse we've looked at, our verse 19, it tells us that Elijah has cast his mantle on Elijah. This means that Elijah would train Elisha. And I didn't realize, but this training, this could take up to 10 years. It'll be a process. So it's something that Elijah is going to have to be committed to and train. It's not just something you just haphazardly enter into. God didn't just haphazardly choose Elisha. He may have not been, others around him may have been like, well, he's just a farmer or whatever, but God knew his capabilities. And he does that with all of us. He knows our capabilities. And I have to believe that he does here with Elisha. The lesson talks about how we be faithful in small things, and God may use us in larger things. And that's very true, isn't it? And you see people sometimes, they come from very simple means, but yet God will use them greatly. I mean, look at some of the greatest preachers and missionaries. Look at the apostles. My goodness, if you want to see people that came from meager or just from nobodies, I mean, he knows how to use people. But it says in verse 20, it says, and he left the oxen, speaking of Elisha, he left the oxen and ran after Elijah. So he knew God's call. And he said, let me, I pray thee, kiss my father and my mother, and then I will follow thee. Well, it sounds like he was the type of person who was going to honor his mother and father. So that's good. It kind of gives us a little bit of insight to his character as to what kind of person he was. But he's going to have a meal there with them. They're going to have two oxen that will be butchered. Probably maybe they had to have 2 because they were so skinny. I don't know. But they were going to have a meal going away, a farewell dinner with them. So again, food was probably very scarce. We read our Bibles and we say, well, this happened, but sometimes we have to think, well, what were the results of this event? Was there any short-term, long-term results? And I'm sure there were. So he's began his following, and then we're going to move down into chapter 20 and read a few verses here. And I was reading this, and I was reading it again yesterday. I want to read verses 1 through 13, and just so we'll kind of all have it all at once. So it says here in verse 20, it says, then and Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, gathered all his hosts together, and there were 32 kings with him. So they've come out of a drought. Isn't it funny how the enemy, they always want to strike when they see you at a weak point. And then, now, why did he wait till right at the end to do this? But I think any wise king or warrior, they're going to look for a weakness, and they're going to attack on it. So he gathered all his hosts together, and there were 32 kings with him, and horses and chariots, and he went up and besieged Samaria and warred against it. And he sent messengers to Ahab, king of Israel, into the city, and said unto him, now notice what he says unto him, thus saith Ben-Hadad, thy silver and thy gold is mine, thy wives also, and thy children, even the goodliest are mine. And the king of Israel answered and said, my lord, O king, according to thy saying, I am thine, and all that I have. Well, I was just really shocked by Ahab, his response, how quick it was. It's like, okay, we give up. That just sounded, if you think about how rough and tough he wanted to appear, but then he gets this threat, and it's, okay. He just throws in his hat. It's like it's done. And, of course, the king of Syria, he's very forceful. He's just saying, this is what we're going to do. He's saying, this is what we're going to do. But he hasn't figured out yet. He hasn't learned yet what God's going to do. So that was Ahab's response there in verse 4. And then it says, and the messengers came again and said, thus speaketh Ben-Hadad, saying, although I have sent unto thee, saying, thou shalt deliver me thy silver and thy gold and thy wives and thy children. He says, yet I will send my servants unto thee tomorrow about this time, and they shall search thine house. What arrogance. Isn't it? He's so arrogant, isn't he? He says, this is, I know I got your response. I know what you said you're going to do, but this is what we're going to do. We're going to come and go into your houses. And we're going to make sure that we get everything that you value, and we're going to take it. So he says, yet I will send my servants unto thee tomorrow about this time, and they shall search thine house and the houses of thy servants. And it shall be that whatsoever is pleasant in thine eyes, they shall put it in their hand and take it away. Then the king of Israel called all the elders. Here's what he should have done in the first place. Then the king of Israel called all the elders of the land and said, mark, I pray you, and see how this man seeketh mischief. For he sent unto me for my wives, and for my children, and for my silver, and for my gold, and I denied him not. So he's at least willing to admit what he's done. And all the elders and all the people said unto him, hearken not unto him, nor consent. So the Israelites, the people of Israel, they're not a weak people. They're not. We see that even today. If you read any of their history, I've read several books on the Holocaust, and to see what those people went through, their families, and how they. Brother Mike, I know he likes some history, World War II history in particular, and they're amazing people, very tough people. They had to be, and God has brought them through. Yes, they've turned their back on the Lord, but He's always left a way back for them. So very tough people, and they're just not quitters. I mean, it's just something when they went into the camps there after World War II, coming to the end of World War II, and it was just amazing what those people had survived, and to hear their stories. I've had the privilege of dealing with some folks over at Brookdale, a few ladies that I wish I could remember. We had our memorial service here, a little German lady, and she would talk about, she lived during the World War II, just as a young girl, Talking about how they had to live, how they would be bombing the places. And I know I'm getting sidetracked, but having to run through the basements. There would be a hole busted in a wall. They had to run from building to building to get away. And just horrible. We had more than one individual. I had another lady there that she lived during this time and migrated here to the States. So very, very resilient people. So that's your history for this morning, I guess. But it's an interesting people and how they're able to continue on even in such hard times. So and all the elders and all the people said unto him, hearken not unto him, nor consent. Then it says, wherefore, so he changed his mind. It says, wherefore he said unto the messengers of Ben-Hadad, tell my lord the king all that thou didst send for thy servant. At first I will do, but this thing I may not do. And the messengers departed and brought him word again. And Ben-Hadad sent unto him and said, the God. Now notice what he says here. See if this doesn't sound familiar. He says, the gods do so unto me, and more also, if the dust of Samaria shall suffice for handfuls for all the people that follow me. Sounds like something Jezebel said, didn't it? How she was going to ruin and cause the end of Elijah. So again, that same arrogance. And the king of Israel answered and said, tell him, let not him that girdeth, now notice he says here, let not him that girdeth on his harness boast himself as he that putteth it off. So what's he saying there? This king of Syria, in his mind, he's already got the battle won. And he's letting him know, well, you may put on your war armaments, but you may not live to take them off. Don't be so assured that's what I took. That's what I think he's saying here. And he says, boast himself, that should not boast himself as he that putteth it off. So your soldiers may end up laying dead on the battlefield with their armaments on them. And it came to pass when Ben-Hadad heard this message, as he was drinking. Now this was the big problem for him, and it cost him. As he was drinking, and the kings in the pavilions, that he said unto his servants, set yourselves in array. And they set themselves in array against the city. Let me get my page here. In verse 13, and behold, there came a prophet. So here's the game changer. And here's God's going to show, I think, who's truly in control. So the two kings have shared their messages back and forth. Ahab has changed his thinking and decided to go another route, agree with the people. But it says, and behold, there came a prophet unto Ahab, king of Israel, saying, thus saith the Lord. And that's what's the key. He says, thus saith the Lord, hast thou seen all this great multitude? Well, I'm sure you had. He says, behold, I will deliver it into thine hand this day, and thou shalt know that I am the Lord. So God is going to use this situation to show, again, who is truly in control of the situation. So I wanted to share that. I know we don't normally go back and read through the whole text, but I thought, what's good to kind of get us all on the same frame of mind at the same time. But in verse 20, it says that he left the oxen. We touched that. He left the oxen. He went. That was the last verse we read there. But now we're looking at Syria attacks Samaria. 1 Kings chapter 21. So Syria has been Israel's continual thorn in the flesh. They've always been poking and prodding at them every chance they get. And here their king Ben-Hadad, he's gathered up these 32 other kings, and they're in agreement together to attack. They've got their chariots, they've got their soldiers. They're ready to go to war against Samaria. This at this time is Israel's capital. Verse 33, then we saw the arrogance, thy silver and thy gold is mine, thy wives and thy children, even the goodliest are mine. So he says all these things. And we saw how odd, but how Ahab gave up seemingly so easily. So again, what we saw on the exterior wasn't maybe what was going on the inside for Ahab. So Benhadad, he had boasted, and he would take their silver, their gold, and their wives. Ahab has made an agreement to allow this to happen. So what does this mean? This means that Israel was surrendering everything to Benhadad, the king of Syria. Just giving it up. All that they had fought for, all that they had been through, and he was willing to give it up. But the people didn't see it that way. The elders and the people there in verse 8, they thought differently. And thank goodness they did. A king or a queen, whoever is in that position, that's just one person, isn't it? And I understand how God, he allows people to be in positions. He does. Sometimes we don't like who it is. Sometimes we like who it is. He allows that, though. He's in control of that. But that doesn't mean that they will always make the right decisions, does it? Doesn't mean that they'll always follow his lead. Even good leaders. Doesn't mean that they'll always follow God's direction. And we can't say that Ahab was one of those good ones, but he definitely wasn't. But it sounds like the people had something had happened there at Mount Carmel, I think. Some of the people had got the clue that, hey, God's in control. And God brought us through that. And God, they came back to the Lord, many of those people at that time. So thank goodness there was that people and those elders, I believe they had saw that. So Ahab, he retracts what he had sent to Benhadad, his elders, and the people. They greatly resisted his surrendering to Benhadad's threats. In verse 11, it tells us there, and the king of Israel answered and said, tell him, let not him that girdeth, again, don't be so boastful, girdeth on his harness boast himself, as he that putteth it off. And it came to pass, when Benhadad heard the message, as he was drinking, he and the kings in the pavilion, that he said unto his servants, set yourselves in array. And they set themselves in array against the city. So the city of Samaria. Verse 13, we started looking at the Israel's victory, where the prophet came to Ahab, and he tells him, this is what's going to happen. He says, I will deliver it into thine hand this day, speaking of the other army, and thou shalt know that I am the Lord. So he's helping them get refocused. Ahab is going to meet his end. We're going to find that out. We're going to see that. But before he does, he's going to know who's in charge. He's going to know that it's the Lord that is the one who truly gives Israel their victories. And that's the same, I think, for any nation. Again, we go back to the nation of Israel, the wars that they fought, and just when they became a country, I think it was 7 different countries come against them. And you listen and read, and just some of the miraculous things that took place during those battles. It's amazing how God's hand has been on them. And the same with us, how God has watched over, I think, our nation also. So again, this prophet comes, and he tells who's going to give the victory. And it's going to be the Lord. So the Lord will fight against Syria's army. That day, Israel had a great victory. The Syrian leaders, they were all drunk, alluded to there in verse 16. This was I like what the writer here said. This was God's mercy to Israel, for Ahab did not deserve it. And he didn't, did he? But really, if you look at it, do we truly deserve all he does for us? Well, we don't, but he does it anyhow, doesn't he? Perhaps God gave Israel victory because many, again, as I taught, many had returned to God on Mount Carmel. So again, God takes into account. He takes into account where we're at. And he's able to bless us, isn't he? He knows our hearts. And I'm glad he does that, because sometimes our outward has to catch up with our inward, if that makes sense. We're so quick to be able to respond one way, but God starts dealing in the heart. And that gets into the mind. And I think that's the correct way it should go. So again, he didn't deserve it. Syria attacks in the plains, so they're always going to make an excuse, I guess, for their loss. But in verse 22, it talks about, and the prophet came into the king of Israel and said unto him, Go strengthen thyself, and mark and see what thou doest, for at the return of the year the king of Syria will come up against thee. So again, the prophet, he warns Ahab. He says, strengthen your forces. He says, they're going to come back. There's going to be another battle. So we don't always get out of our problems, but the Lord will help us to get through our problems. Verse 23, and the servants of the king of Syria said unto him, well, he said, they say, their gods are gods of the hills. I thought it's almost comical for us maybe to read that, but that's what they're thinking. That's how their thinking was. Because it's just like the prophets of Baal. Well, this didn't work. Well, maybe this will work. This is the route we need to take. And with our gods, you don't have to take different routes. You have one route, one way of going to him, and he has pretty much singular ways of operating. But these, they say their gods are the gods of the hills. Therefore, they were stronger than we. But let us fight against them in the plain, and surely we shall be stronger than they. So they're going to say, well, we couldn't beat them in the hills. We're going to fight them in the plains. So they want to continue on the battle. So they attributed Israel's victory again to the gods of the hills. Well, the gods of the hills are